The clock ticked ominously toward 10 p.m. Emily stood in her dimly lit kitchen, the shadows dancing along the walls as she stirred a pot of boiling pasta. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, and an unsettling chill crept into her bones. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, just her and a nice dinner. But something felt off. She glanced at the old grandfather clock in the corner. Its pendulum swung slowly, each tick echoing in the silence, as if counting down to something dreadful. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Mark, her husband, running late. Don't wait up. A pang of worry twisted in her stomach, but she shrugged it off. He always worked late. As she drained the pasta, a sudden crash echoed from the living room. Heart racing, she set the pot down and tiptoed toward the sound, the wooden floor creaking beneath her feet. The living room was empty, but the window was ajar, flapping against the frame. Emily locked it, her hands trembling. Just the wind, she whispered, trying to soothe herself. But as she turned back to the kitchen, a cold draft swept past her, extinguishing the flame on the stove. The room plunged into darkness. Panic surged. "Hello?" she called out, her voice quivering. Silence. She fumbled for her phone, its screen illuminating her face with an eerie glow. The time read 10:03 p.m. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and flicked on the flashlight. As the beam cut through the shadows, it caught a glimpse of something moving just beyond the kitchen doorway, a fleeting shadow that vanished before she could focus. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to believe it was just her imagination. But the feeling of being watched prickled at her skin. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, slow and deliberate. Her heart pounded in her chest as she crept toward the source, the flashlight trembling in her grip. "Mark?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. No response. The footsteps stopped. She could hear her own breathing, shallow and panicked. Gathering courage, she peered around the corner, but the hallway was empty. Just then, a low whisper floated through the air, chilling her to the bone. "Emily." Her name, soft yet sinister, seemed to curl around her like smoke. She stumbled back, nearly tripping over the rug. Was someone in the house? The door was locked, but dread pooled in her stomach as she considered the worst. "Get a grip," she muttered, forcing herself to move back to the kitchen. Just as she reached for the light switch, the lights flickered back on. The comforting glow returned, but something was wrong. Her reflection in the window wasn't alone. A figure loomed behind her, dark and indistinct, mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. She spun around, but the kitchen was empty. Heart racing, she pressed her back against the counter, breath hitching in her throat. This isn't real. It's just the stress. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Just then, her phone buzzed again. A new message from Mark. "Can't make it home, just stay where you are, don't open the door." The hairs on her neck stood up, she felt a presence behind her, and a chilling voice whispered again, "Let me in." In a blind panic, she darted for the front door, locking it and bolting the deadbolt. But the whispers grew louder, an unintelligible cacophony that filled the air, drowning out her thoughts. "Please, just go away," she cried, her voice breaking. The kitchen grew colder, and she could see her breath fogging in front of her. A shadow stretched across the floor, creeping toward her. She backed up, searching for something, anything, to defend herself. Her eyes landed on a butcher knife, gleaming ominously on the counter. Just as she reached for it, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, sharp and piercing, "Dinner time, Emily." With a primal scream, she grabbed the knife, her mind racing. The figure emerged from the shadows, an in-case silhouette that seemed to swallow the light. It stepped forward, revealing eyes that glowed like dying embers. "Join us," it hissed, stretching out a hand that dripped with darkness. In that moment, Emily realized she was not alone, and the 10 p.m. dinner she had planned was no longer just a meal. It was a grim invitation to a feast she could never escape. As the darkness closed in around her, she understood one thing: she should never have waited for him. The clock struck 10:10 p.m., and all was silent once more.